Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. I have Naresh Persaud. So, Naresh, if you could introduce yourself and give a little bit of background.
Yeah, no, hey, Tony. I'm glad to be here. I'm a principal at Deloitte in our cyber practice, and my background's in identity management. Been in identity management for 20 something years. Building identity products and also implementing them. And I now lead an effort around our cyber AI blueprints, which is really looking at how you take the cyber function and reimagine that ground up. Cybersecurity, has been largely multiple disciplines coming together. With AI, we have the opportunity to think about the cognitive synergy across these disciplines and how it can be more effective.
Okay. So I'm not going to shock you or anyone else by saying that, like pretty much every conversation we've had for the last two and a half years has revolved in some way around AI. I've said I've pointed out on previous podcast episodes that from a cybersecurity perspective, that it was actually earlier than that. Yes, things kind of exploded with OpenAI and ChatGPT and going into generative and agentic AI, but we were already using AI ML as like buzzwords, going back years before that. From your vantage point, and you've been covering identity for, like you said, for like 20 years. Why is identity emerged as kind of the foundation of AI-driven security?
Well, there are a couple of things here. And number one, when you look at cyber attacks as a whole, identity is leveraged as an attack vector in almost all of them, right? Whether it's credential harvesting, privilege escalation, password cracking, excessive access opportunities, dormant accounts, if you go down all of the attacks, right, at some point in time, they're leveraging a weakness in the access model or the way access is granted to drive an exploitation, right? Now, the reason, and in addition to that, identity is one of these things that's sort of, if you think about how organizations work, we're leaning more into non-human identity, more automated workload, which creates more credentials. You've got agentic AI, which creates more opportunity for agents to work independently and need identity. So when you think about cybersecurity, there's an intersection here to not only reduce the exposure created by identity, but use that as a way to simplify how cyber works as a whole. And there are multiple integration points here where identity can enable the other pillars of cybersecurity to operate better.
Okay. Well, so you touched on a couple of things there that I've covered in the past and covered recently. Which so one is, it was many years ago, at least a decade ago, that I was having a conversation with an executive from a vendor, and kind of pointed out this epiphany that I had, that I was talking with someone about insider threats. And I said, well, you know what? The way attacks work now, at the point of attack, everything's an insider threat, pretty much. Because the attackers aren't, breaching, some other way. They're using credentials. They're using valid credentials. In most cases. So however they got them, whether it's phishing, whether it's whatever, even if it is an inside attack, like at the point of attack from a security perspective, it's generally speaking being executed using valid credentials, however those were obtained. And then the other thing that you hit on is the fact that while we talk a lot about password security and MFA and 2FA and those things, that human beings with usernames and passwords using MFA are barely the tip of the iceberg for identity, now. And even years ago, like machine to machine, application to machine, like all of those things make up the vast majority of identities, and those things, don't have, like we can't implement MFA on those. So yeah, I've seen it described, and I think you've described it as identity as a kind of the context that connects the dots for AI security. So, in practical terms, what kind of context does identity provide?
Yeah.
That traditional security signals alone don't.
Yeah, let me give you a couple examples. So, you just brought up the examples where, credentials, harvesting. At some point, they're using legitimate credentials, right? Insider threat are legitimate credentials doing very bad things, and some bad actor gets hold of those credentials, privileged or unprivileged, and they start shifting, using those to maneuver. When you think about it, then from a defensive point of view or even preventative point of view, putting identity data first becomes critical. Let's say you take that scenario and you look at a security operations center, right? And you're looking at event monitoring, interestingly enough. If you look at the individual, if you don't have context on the identity, for example, it's hard for you to understand what the impact of a transaction is. Let's say, for example, an incident occurs on an endpoint and it's a privileged X user. If you know which user owns that account, right, you would then be able to tell what other accounts that user owns. And if the attacker compromised that privileged account or that user, they may have access to the other accounts as well. So you can estimate blast radius, right? Number one. Number two, let's say an incident happens and you want to document information about that for that case. The identity information helps you do that, right? Look at produce the documentation, understand the role and what impact they have, and help resolve cases faster. But more importantly, if when you look at these attacks, that insider threat example you brought up, when these individual things are happening in isolation, the activities look benign, right? But when you look at the activities in totality, all of a sudden you can tell patterns that look nefarious, right? And so identity is what helps you connect all of those activities together, typically, right? It's rare that they're doing a transaction as Naresh, then doing it as Tony, and breaking these up. They're usually occurring within the umbrella of some user context that's been compromised.
Okay.
And I can give you a few other examples. So like if you look at, for instance, if you think about application security from a defensive posture, right? When you think about role definitions, in order to have least privilege, right? The most important thing is to figure out the context of the user and what are the minimal privileges. That context is not, isn't an arbitrary function. It has to do with a job role a human's doing, or even the role that a non-human actor, doing, executing automated workload or something is doing. Identity is what helps you kind of create the least privilege and help you manage that on an ongoing basis. Let's say we look at IT asset management, right? Organizations have a tough time discovering all of the assets. As soon as you do that, you have to understand what users have access to those assets, right? Because we can't tell legitimate access. We can't tell who shouldn't have access unless we know who should have access. Obviously not, unless it's the cafeteria menu, which everybody should have access to, right? Like if it's not the cafeteria menu, you probably need to figure out what least privilege looks like, whether it's data, devices in an organization, et cetera. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I think agentic AI to me is gonna make this. It seems like it's going to make it like exponentially more challenging or whatever. From the perspective of, like I said, we've already got application to application, machine to application. All these kind of like non-human identities already exist. But now we've got enterprises, some suggesting that employees should embrace agentic AI and use tools. Some insisting that employees use agentic AI, and On one level, I think it makes sense, and I've talked about how, like if you're a CEO, you have a team. There are VPs that work under you and directors that work under them, and so the CEO doesn't like just magically have all of the information and all of the answers and doesn't do everything themselves. They're delegating things to a team of people, and then those people are delegating to other teams of people, and then all of that kind of funnels up so that you can make effective decisions and act accordingly. And to me, agentic AI is just applying that same sort of logic, but at the employee level, like that I at the employee level can have a team. It's just that instead of hiring people, I'm just going to have agents who can, execute different tasks. But if I do that, if every employee in the company suddenly has 5 agents, 10 agents, 20 agents, doing things on their behalf, all of a sudden we've, exploded the number of identities out there, by like a quantum leap.
That's right. Yeah, it's a multiple, right? Like a geometric growth of the number of identities. But I think what you just outlined is probably one of the most important concerns, certainly, right? The number of agents people control, revocable consent, entitlements for agents, because we don't have a handle, and agents have modality. So, the agent that does procurement may be doing something else at the same time. Kind of like it doesn't eat, it doesn't sleep, it has 5 jobs in the company, right? Maybe it dotted lines to someone else, right? But that, from an access perspective, presents a challenge. Directionally, though, when you think about the risks of these agents, applications having an MCP server on them that now act as agents, agentify themselves, et cetera, create a challenge. And you brought up agent-to-agent communication. It's one thing to have an agent that is performing actions. It's almost amplifies the problem when you have 2 agents collaborating to determine an answer, because it's not just the observability of one agent. You have to understand the observability of the other agent it's communicating with, because if one's breached, right, like one, I think if you look at the report, the Anthropic report from November 13th, they documented the first autonomous cyber attack. The unauthenticated MCP services being, fooled into helping them perpetrate a fully autonomous attack is an example of how agent-to-agent communication could be potentially used as an attack vector here in an organization. So I think, I would also draw the analogy to when everyone started adopting web servers in their organization. When you looked across the network, you'd find all of these shadow web servers everywhere that potentially could expose data. All of the products that you bought in started, having web servers running on them, and it created a huge, issue in terms of how you secure data that were now exposed through these web services. I think AI takes it a bit further, into the extent that you have now agents that are interacting, have guardrails around them that could potentially be circumvented, et cetera, and you've got to put the appropriate policies around them. In addition to the problem you outlined, which is you now have, agent to human relationships, and you've got to properly throttle least privilege according to what these agents are supposed to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I've seen different companies are approaching this, differently. At Falcon, George Kurtz talked about CrowdStrike's event in the fall. He talked about he didn't name names, I don't think, but he talked about some companies that are, even assigning like employee IDs to agents or whatever. And it gets a little, so it's interesting to me, because I've talked about that, about saying, okay, well, like if I take this back to me using agents. Now, if I had unlimited budget and I wanted to hire people or whatever, like, let's say I go hire 5 people to be able to delegate tasks to. Well, each of those people would have a unique their own unique identity, employee number, whatever, and I would delegate different tasks to each of them. With AI agents, I tend to think about them in the same way, where I would say, okay, well, I want this agent to go do this thing and this agent to go do this thing. So I'm delegating different things. Mm-hmm. And on some level, I want those agents to have only the access rights, the permissions for the things that I'm asking that agent to do. Where it seems a little, but it's like that. But then I want those agents to then, build drawing the line or whatever, like the guardrails between agents seems to be more challenging than it would be between humans, because it's like, well, on some level, the AI agents, are going to communicate with each other and coordinate efforts, and they kind of should. But then ultimately, like from an organizational standpoint, these agents are going out and they're doing things on my behalf. There needs to be some way, I'm assuming there needs to be some way for IT security, someone to be able to say, okay, I see this agent doing these things. That's Tony's agents. There has to be like a dotted line that connects the agent back to me, so you can attribute the actions to somebody.
Yes. Yeah. No. I mean, I think we have clients who are sort of thinking through that problem as well. And if you look at the way this is playing out in the market, almost every platform, the number of platforms out there that'll support agents, tons of them, right? Organizations are going to have to map their identity and access management systems to those platforms to map these agents back to named users, right? Because unless you can map it back to a person who's in, the HR system or the contractor system, that's a physical human, it's difficult to understand that attribution, number one. But number two, back to the observability and monitoring, absolutely critical. The requirements that the observability data be searchable, you can have reports on it to look at whether the activities are, how do you get you have to get the forensics, especially when you've got agent-to-agent communication across two platforms and you're trying to reconstruct how something happened, or what results something had in a system. But this is I think a challenge that this is a large challenge for organizations today. But a lot of it is but again, I think identity is at the core of that, right? Being able to connect back to a user or link these agents together, if you're looking at the observability log, agent A talks to agent B, having an identity registry that maps those agents is absolutely critical, because agents could be instantiated multiple times. When an agent takes a request and decomposes it, it's non-deterministic, right? One incarnation will have if we get similar asking ChatGPT a question today, 3 years later, we come back and ask ChatGPT the same question, we get a very different answer, right? Presumably each answer was correct at that point in time, but you're going to need some observability information to confirm. Models weren't poisoned. You didn't have, bad data. Like, was the decisioning appropriate? Do we need to retrain effectively? And you've got to think about that for agents now and apply the same sort of diligence in an organization managing agents.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I think is we're going to have to work out, like culturally, is that sort of, and this is tangential to our discussion, but is the sort of like, okay, well, who's ultimately responsible? Like if I have a team of 10 agents and the agent goes out and does things, do you hold Tony Bradley accountable for what his agent did? And I think the answer is well, it depends. I think the answer is like to some extent, yes. Like but also if you're a company that's mandating that employees jump on board and start doing these things, I think you also have to kind of accept that there's going to be some hiccups. Hopefully they aren't the kind of hiccups that crash the whole network or anything like that. But But then from the user perspective, I think, if you're using the AI agents, you do have to exercise, some diligence there, some vigilance, and like reviewing what you get, and not just, it's the don't ask ChatGPT a question and then just copy and paste the answer and assume that it's correct. Like you've got to do some due diligence there to make sure that it knows what it's talking about.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I mean, and I think different users are going to adapt to that differently. But it reminds me of RoboCop, where she's given the partner, right, and RoboCop becomes her partner, and there's this time where they've got to figure out how to trust each other, right? The same thing happens with humans working with agents, right? They're going to see the output and understand how much verification and inspection some things are obvious or not, and over time that'll evolve. But I think there's definitely a a user experience, right, as they adapt to working with them, which will also drive the amount of trust that people put in agents, and how much, and how they evolve over time. But it's a big part of the security, security thinking, because, it's, are these agents truly autonomous? Are there humans who really have visibility on what the agent is doing? And are they even checking, right? If I assume a human being is looking at the output of the agent, let's say the agent is changing the financials of the company, and someone just trusts it and the financials are incorrect, that's very problematic. And so the amount of accountability humans have and trust we put in agents, and the amount of verification, and this is one of the things where it's cybersecurity meets operational security, right? Because it's, no one broke in. The agent may have just, updated the wrong information because the model was had some poisoning or something, or was skewed, for example. So these things are going to become, and I think a lot of those things are falling into cybersecurity. When you think about an HR problem, you have a physical security problem. Well, that was when an agent goes rogue or maybe goes bad, someone's going to say, well, what monitoring do we have on it? When did it happen? Was it introduced because of a piece of third-party software? Was the model trained incorrectly? And then all these things will become standard. We'll have to depend upon standards that security teams have to put in place to assure sort of the fidelity of the output. Yeah.
There's an interesting sort of like, and I can't think of the word I'm looking for. So like, internet came along and it was like, oh, this is going to be great. It's magical. Everyone in the world will instantly have access to all of the information in the world, and like anything you want to know, you can just go Google that, and you can find the answers. And while that's theoretically true on some level, I think what we didn't anticipate in circa 1999 2000 era was the amount of incorrect information that would also be out there. We thought we would just have access to all of the information, and it's like, well, yes, you do. Unfortunately, 90% of it is wrong.
Yeah.
And just in the last few years, I've had this, realization of, yeah, this was supposed to make my life easier. And what it's done is make homework for me.
That's right.
So now if I go Google something, I can't just Google something and you're like, okay, cool. Now I know things. I have to Google it. And then I have to kind of like go through and Google the Googling.
Yes.
and dig deeper to verify, is this true or not? And I think we're in that same position now with the AI agents, where it's like, hopefully, in order for agentic AI, in order for AI to realize its potential, to streamline work and improve productivity, we have to trust it, and that trust has to be earned. But in the short term, what that means is, instead of streamlining things and making me more productive, it's making homework. Because now I've got everything that I assigned to the AI. Now I've got to triple check it to make sure it's right.
Yes. Well, there's so yeah. By the way, you've highlighted another major risk here, and which connected to identity as well, which is this misinformation attacks, right? Where it would have taken a human being a lot of time to create misinformation, make it look real, fake videos, and all of those things. AI can do incredibly quickly, and so the opportunity for misinformation attacks to be launched against organization, impact their brand and reputation, tremendous. And that goes back to identity as well. Can you trust the agent and also the people who run that agent effectively and what their ambitions are? The impact of it also highlights the impact of verification, hallucination, right? As your there are fabrications where blatantly creating misinformation, or also AI agents that hallucination impacts that people have to do additional verification on, right? So determining malicious action is much more complex than it ever has been going forward. I mean, if you're on the internet, the trick is you truly don't know if you're interacting with a human or a bot, right? And in that situation, but the bots now have become tremendously more intelligent, right, and can learn over time and be with reinforce that they can augment their training and things like that.
Okay. So I mean, and the vendors that I've talked to in the last year or two, I mean, pretty much everyone has talked about agentic AI as you just talked about, as augmenting, not replacing humans. And I've had conversations. I've come back to saying, okay, that might be that's true on one level, but on another level, like ultimately it will certainly replace some humans, at least in some capacities. Like that's kind of the point. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if I play this out over the next decade, 2 decades, whatever, ultimately I'm like, well, isn't that the goal? Like, I kind of want it to replace the humans. We want the, Star Trek Federation, future, utopia, where, like, let the AI do all the things, and I'll sit around and write the next great American novel or whatever. Like, but the challenge is, in the short term, people still need incomes. People, it's like we haven't solved that part of the problem. So it's like we're racing to implement the AI in a way that could potentially take someone's job, but we're not also then putting the things in place that allow that person to still survive.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm a little bit, and by the way, no one knows the exact answer to that because it's evolving and being placed into places in the economy that we can't truly. So let's say, for example, content creators, you need far fewer of them, so you have to pay less humans. But there's certain areas in the market where the quantity demanded would be much higher if we could deliver those services at scale. So, for example, I can't afford a personal chauffeur, right? It would be too expensive for me. But if I have a driverless vehicle, now it's affordable to have a personal chauffeur. The quantity demanded is much larger than you could, and also at the same time, so. That's it. Cybersecurity, for example, most organizations today, small organizations can't afford to have their personalized security operations center. They have to use other sources, simplify it. But in the future, if you were to take agents and they do all the level 1 security analysis, maybe you need fewer people in level 2 and level 3. A smaller organization could afford world-class security operations center. The quantity demanded is much higher than we have today. In cyber, we've always had the challenge of, significant amount more demand than we've had supply of people. So if we augment with agents, we're really just shifting the equation. We can shift the equation to address a broader quantity demand. So that's one thing. The other thing is that when you look at what agents bring, it creates a whole new class of jobs, right? Of people maintaining these curating. So there's another way to upskill. But the part that I'm most intrigued about is the way it can reshape human potential, right? When you think about how long does it take to train and get a great security operations center analyst? It takes a long time. You need lots of experience on the tools. They're doing lots of automation. They have an engineering mindset. In Star Trek, but you brought up the example, we wouldn't do that. We'd send people to the holodeck, right? They'd go to the holodeck, they'd train with synthetic data, and they'd come out and they'd know how to fly the craft, right? And they're ready to go. When Captain Kirk decides he's going to go to the planet, he doesn't call he could never fit the number of people needed on that ship to do all the analysis of the air, the soil, and all of those things before he went down. It would take him, he'd hover above the planet, 2 decades later, he finally decided to go on an away mission because the people finally did all the computation. But here, a human starship, he can get down to the planet a lot faster. And the way you think and leverage the AI to do the work means we can now have more starships than we've ever had before, with more captains driving mission and purpose. So I do think there's what we haven't really yet imagined is what human potential looks like, right?
Right.
We got out of college and we had our hearts set on this job. We were going to train for this job, and that's the job we're going to do. But that was not the mission purpose, right? The mission and purpose of our lives and our place here in the world was much bigger than that. What we need is clarity on how to get there, like directionally. And my hope is that as people is that we don't ask people, hey, what job do you want to do when you get out of school? It's going to be, what impact do you want to have on the world, right? Like that now changes it's the question and how you think about your mission and purpose when you go into education and get your job that changes what you can so I think those things fundamentally, once we shift that, right, now you're on a very different course, right? And I do think human beings are I look at how quickly kids learn, Chat GPT and Perplexity, and they're using it as second nature, right? When they go in to pick their jobs, they're not picking a certain job that makes X dollars. They're picking a mission and a purpose and an impact on the world, and figuring out how to take the tools and everything they have available to go achieve it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I have been striving for, and like, so I had enough sort of awareness to recognize that the questions that I'm pondering as it relates to how things evolve with AI, I'm asking those questions from the perspective of like the way things have been done. So when you look at like, okay, well, if the AI is doing that, then what am I supposed to do? And what I'm trying to strive for is to try to figure out, okay, well, that's perhaps the wrong question. How it does become like, well, no, you have to imagine how it will be in the future, and I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't come up with the right solution yet. But I do look back at other things. So we regularly talk about the example of going from horse to automobile. Going the introduction of the pocket calculator for schools. And it's like the introduction of the internet and Google and stuff. So like there are these different sort of very pivotal events in human history that at the time seem like, well, what are all the people who do horseshoes and make wagon wheels? What are they supposed to do with their lives? Like if everyone has a calculator, do I even need to learn math? It's like when you look at it and from the perspective of the way you do it now or the way you have done it, it seems like more of a problem, because you're like, well, wait a minute, I'm assigning things to these kids and now they're just going to go Google it. So that's, so that's cheating and we can't let them do that. And it's like, well, no, you have to shift the way you're educating. You have to shift your expectations for what the results are, but you should want them to Google it. I mean, I've always been a huge fan of like open book type tests for schools, because I'm like, that's reality. In my job, like no one is expecting me to have everything in the world memorized. Like when someone asks you to do something, you're allowed to Google it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, it's probably, and maybe if you're not, if you spend time Googling it, it lets you do the higher order thinking of what to do with the answer versus devoting all your calories to memorizing the answer and regurgitating it, right? Because that's really what you're doing. Your calories are spent on, on doing what the computer's doing now versus what you should be doing is taking that output and creating greater value on top of it, which is, what I think we've got to do. Yeah.
And I've seen people who are like, I've seen like social media posts of people who are horrified that they went to see a doctor and they shared some stuff, and then like the doctor like Google stuff, and they're like, no, I'm coming to you because you're the doctor. Like you're just Googling stuff. I can do that at home. And I'm like, well, hold on. I want the doctor Googling things.
That's right. That's right. Yeah,
because the alternative is the doctor who has such a God complex that they think that everything they learned 20 years ago is still the only and right answer. And it's like, well, no, you need somewhere in the middle. Like, yes, I want you to have learned a lot of stuff and I want you to have experience and I want you to know things, but I also want you to have the self-awareness to realize you don't know everything and to consider other options.
Oh, by the way, I mean, that's a really good cyber example, because when you have analysts who are what you know, AI agents looking at lots of data are able to find these patterns that the humans wouldn't have found, right? And that, I think, that interlock now helps us reach for better, right? I think, and I think if we can get comfortable with that, we can do a lot more. And I think the doctor situation is a good one, right? If my doctor were using AI to identify problems, diagnose faster, identify better treatment options, I'm better for it, right? Like that's a better doctor than the doctor that didn't use AI at all, right? Like it wasn't able to stay updated. So I think, there are benefits here that we've got to think about those benefits, but also I think, doctor, very expensive, right? That's something that we need a quantity demanded higher. We could deliver more healthcare if we could actually produce more doctors faster to help people, right? Like that's a really good area where, look, if we lower the barrier to entry to doctor and we could take people and train them to be doctors faster, I think we've got to rework the equation for what that looks like. And I think there's a lot more potential behind it with AI than without it. And maybe we employ more people. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, let's pull this back a little bit. So from let's pull it back to agentic AI, kind of at the SOC level. Go back to where we were talking about, that we're using this to augment, not to replace, per se. Mm-hmm. And the notion that, and I think you hit on this earlier, that like the AI. It's better at pattern recognition. It's better at scale. It's better at, so it's like it's kind of ideal for a level 1 SOC analyst. Mm-hmm. And then that frees up people to do other things. But as we embrace agentic AI, identity security becomes, like we talked about, it kind of explodes exponentially. So then how does identity security, how can that act as a control plane, for kind of managing this?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of things that, one, I think identity now embedded across the security operating model, right? When you look at every part of cyber, let's say you take asset management, data privacy, network security, all of these things. If you can use identity as the intersection so that all of the events, assets, and things like that can be viewed from an identity perspective, it helps us get better visibility, right? Overall. So I think that's where, as we think about it, AI can help. One, it can help us simplify AI security. It's critical to securing AI, and at the same time, helping us AI enable the entire cyber function as a whole, right? And that's where I think the opportunity is really, really helpful for us.
Okay. At Deloitte, you guys have like the cyber AI blueprints, and they're kind of framed as a way to move from experimentation to execution. What problem do the blueprints solve for security leaders, and how do they help in terms of getting embracing and implementing AI?
Yeah, so I think as we have, what we have seen in the market with AI is a lot of confusion. When people have gone about these programs, they maybe survey everyone. What do you think? How can we leverage AI in cyber? You'll get 5,000 answers, right, around things like what if we used it to, update tickets in a database and all of these other things. But the question leaders are asking is, does that really move the needle, right? Am I picking random things to AI enable that maybe not be successful, and we're sort of experimenting a little bit. At the same time, you have lots of products out there that are building AI into the product offerings, and it's not clear whether that AI is adding enough value. So, for example, I always use the kitchen remodeling example, right? You're remodeling your kitchen. Do you want just an AI oven to replace your existing oven and an AI microwave and an AI fridge? Well, in the AI world, the fridge, the microwave, the oven, and the dishwasher can become the same appliance. And now you have a very, very different kitchen entirely. So fundamentally, what we've done with the blueprints is we've literally broken down how all of the processes across a cyber function, asset management, identity management, security operations center, looked at these processes, identified places where we can have cognitive synergy. If we were augmenting an LLM to make decisions, et cetera, how would we take these processes and truly AI enable? And by the way, there's a lot of things that are just automation, not necessarily AI, that you have to. The blueprints are a way for us to take these processes, have a very specific design along with technology components that we've built at Deloitte, so that when a client comes to us, we can say, here's a blueprint and here's a path forward that can demonstrate these tangible business value benefits, and we can stand behind that and deliver that for a client.
Okay. Your kitchen remodeling example, I think, is a perfect analogy for what I was talking about like trying to think, not in terms of like the way we've done things, but trying to imagine things that you haven't thought of yet. And that's I think a perfect example to say, well, yeah, you might think, okay, well, now I need a AI oven and now I need an AI refrigerator. It's like, okay, well, what if you don't? What if those things are now obsolete entirely? And it's not just that you need a better version of that thing. You need something else entirely.
I mean,
it goes back to the the concept of if Henry Ford saying if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And I think Steve Jobs had like a paraphrased version of that as well. It's like, well, no, you need to you want to envision something different. You want to envision something better, not just a better, faster iteration of the thing that already exists.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and this is where electric car, driverless cars, well, you don't need a driver's seat. The opportunity you have is not to have an empty spot there, but reimagine the potential of that space entirely, right? Could you do meetings in it, right? Once you've unshackled yourself from the status quo, the potential is much greater. So even as you think about cyber programs and you're reimagining it, an identity, for example, instead of human beings, hands-on keyboard provisioning access, using computer vision agents. They can learn just like people coming out of college how to navigate through an app, perform the actions. They can provide the observability input, and then internal and external auditors can actually interact with them, right? Completely changing the way that's done. When we think about how access is managed, right, for privileged access users, for example, the same, the information before sat in multiple systems, but we can now train AI models to understand that so that we can better, have better decisioning on it, right? Or even when you look at security operations centers, if the security operations center agent had access to the identity management agent, a human being wouldn't have to call another human being to interrogate the data or draw conclusions about the information. That could then be negotiated. So there are these tremendous opportunities to bring cyber together and make it work more effectively when we reimagine it ground up, right? As opposed to replacing an AI microwave with an AI microwave, right? And by the way, I think cyber programs have to do that, right? In a world where cyber attacks will be driven by AI, the best counter defense are AI-enabled cybersecurity programs that can anticipate those threats and better prepare defenses against them, right? And so we're going to need AI uplift in order to have stronger cybersecurity programs.
Agreed. But I also feel like that, so in the same way we've always had the cat and mouse game between attackers and defenders, it's like now we're just AI scaling that. It's like, they're going to use AI, so we need to have better, faster AI, and then they'll come up with even better, faster AI, and back and forth. We will continue to go. So I know we're kind of coming up on time, but as let's look ahead a bit. AI systems are here. They're becoming, more autonomous, more interconnected, more involved in everything we're doing. In that context, as we go forward, what identity-related risks worry you most? Like, where do you see the biggest opportunity for organizations to get this right or wrong?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, the most important thing for organizations right now is to get in front of it and put standards, policies, and protections in place. The wrong answer would be to wait and see what happens, because agents will proliferate at such a rapid pace, and once it gets to the point where you've got thousands of agents in your organization, you're trying to bring it under control, it's much harder, right? So for organizations to get it right, they've got to lay the foundation and the groundwork to anticipate these risks and put controls in place, standards, policies. If we don't give developers policies on how to, protect from model poisoning, detect it, look for skew, look for drift, build that discipline into into the organization. You're going to be a great athlete. You've got to have an exercise discipline, et cetera. You've got to, just like organizations that had to, before there were computers, there was no IT organization. You built the discipline, then IT organizations evolved over time. You've got to build that cyber AI operational discipline, right? Putting standards in place, validating people following, because waiting longer, bad idea. The other thing I think organizations have to do is also start getting a handle on their private data that they need in order to enable AI. Because when you look at a lot of what's necessary here, a lot of the data that you're going to leverage to train agents, et cetera, are going to be private data, right? Your own monitoring data internally, that you're not going to take that data, put it out publicly and train a public model. You're going to augment and have that stuff internally. So organizations getting a handle on data, training, et cetera, and build that discipline, absolutely critical going forward.
All right. Well, I mean, it's an interesting conversation. And honestly, like I need to make like a checklist of the things not to keep saying on every episode of the podcast because it gets redundant. Like if someone actually listened to these all the time, and I don't know what that audience looks like. I think it's just me and my wife maybe who listen to all of them. So it's maybe not as big a problem as I'm anticipating, but I do notice because every interaction, this is the first time you and I are interacting. And so like, and my, last podcast guest, it was the first time he and I were interacting, or actually it wasn't, it was the second time, and so they all seem like unique conversations to me. Yep. But if you were to go watch them back to back, and you'd say, all right, well, there's Tony making that Henry Ford example again. Like, it's like I need to differentiate my analogy some.
No, I use that one all the time too. So yeah, that's. And by the way, I think that's a really good example. I think that one's going to get used a lot with AI because before this point, everything looked like faster horses, right? But at this point, I think that's one of the key things is that AI itself now finds all the answers that are not faster horses, right? So I think that's it's a really good test. Is your AI coming up with the obvious faster horses answer, or is it truly finding new answers that human beings couldn't have found? Yeah.
Right. It is interesting. So there's. So on the one hand, you take like a ChatGPT and it only knows what it's been trained on. So I've had those debates and conversations as well in terms of like, can generative AI have a unique thought? And there's debate about that. It's like, well, no, it's derivative. It's a probabilistic derivative of existing knowledge. Mm-hmm. That said, it can still correlate things and pattern recognize things and do it at a scale that you can't in a way that maybe does end up coming up with a unique thought or at least a thought you wouldn't have thought of, which is, I think, the key point. It's like, well, maybe we can debate whether or not it's unique. The point is, would you have thought of it? And you can literally just ask ChatGPT that. Like you could say, okay, here's what I know. Here's what I know. Here's what I think I know. Here are the questions I've asked. What have I not thought of? Mm-hmm. And it will give you an answer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, I mean, you brought up the Star Trek example. That's what they always ask the computer, right? Before the computer, tell us, but you're absolutely right. It's can it have a unique thought it takes us longer to have unique thoughts than it takes long, to have unique thoughts. And to some extent, most of what we create is derivative knowledge as well, right? Like
I was going to leave you with that philosophical conundrum, which because my wife has brought that up when we were talking with our kids about AI. She's like, well, everything we think we know is derivative as well. So
yeah. We're influenced by others, right? Like your ideas, all of what we've done has been based upon the things that have worked that other people have done, and the things that we've learned in school and then professionally have shaped how the ideas we've had, et cetera. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to join me. It was a fun conversation, and hopefully we can have you back on another 6 months or a year. We'll see how things have changed.
Likewise, yeah, no, I really appreciate the time and good conversation. I love I like the fast horses analogy. It's actually appropriate, and and by the way, I love the Star Trek comparisons as well. I think that's I find myself oftentimes going back to those. Yeah.